Okay, welcome everybody to a Freethinkers Corner, Books and More. We're coming to you from our gallery and hopefully get this going and have some art shows here as well. And I'm trying to get the Facebook Live going. For whatever reason, that is not working. So I'm hoping to get that going soon. And then we'll hopefully get that. So anyways, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to put them in the chat box. I've got you all muted for now and your video off. I'll ask you to unmute and bring your video up, and then you can ask your question directly to our guest. So again, thank you for coming to our Meet the Author series. Our guest today is Maine author Mary Lou Bagley. She is a Maine-based author. She's an experienced educator, a seasoned storyteller, and a multidisciplined artist. Her book, Otherwise, is the first in a series. It was published in 2018. Her second book in the series, The Other Way of Knowing, is forthcoming. I hope to have that soon. Otherwise, is available in the store. She's a member of the Maine Writers and Publishers Alliance. And she also has a blog called Time to Write, which offers inspiration and gentle nudgings to other artists and creatives. So, Mary Lou Bagley, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Chris. We appreciate you. We appreciate a Freethinkers Corner, independent bookstore. So please visit Chris, talk to Chris, get him to mail you something if you can't go there. A Freethinkers Corner, Books and More. I would like to introduce you to, I know that some people here have read Otherwise, some have not. So I would like to introduce my character, Margaret Meader, introduce the book. This right here is, okay, I've lost Chris. Let me just change my.
No, I'm fine. No, just keep going.
Okay, am I on screen? Because I can't see myself now.
Yep, you're good. You're good.
Okay, this is my book. And this is the book which Chris just showed you. The reason that I hold this up is I have a particular way of keeping track of things. There are programs online, and I'm looking into those, but right now I don't want to take the time away from my writing for a new learning curve. So I keep track of characters, their names, and a few brief descriptions on cards that I can just grab. I also like tactile experience. So, and I also have chapter summaries. So they're at my fingertips, literally. And so again, the book looks like this once it's done. Margaret is a 62-year-old native Mainer and an outsider. Though she's not from away, many in her community deem her an oddity, an other. Plain spoken, direct, Margaret is gifted with second sight, an intuitive ability to see beyond ordinary perception, distill what she's seen to its practical essence. I am reading off the back of the book, so this would be something that would introduce you to her if you were just handling the book and not talking with me. For decades, her gift has benefited many while frightening others, often making her a target for jealousy and suspicion and hatred. And as this book goes on, some of the old business from her past comes coming back around, setting the stage for confrontations rooted in tragedies of the past. The other protagonist in this first book is Emily Dunn, a young woman who comes to meet Margaret, and her story unfolds. So I would call the book, if you had to put it in a particular genre, literary, in that it is character-driven. And I shall give you a little taste from Otherwise, and then I will give you a little taste from This Other Way of Knowing, which is the second book in the series. The plan right now is to have 3 books in all, but you know, the best laid plans, one never knows, could be more. And because this title has come to me, This Other Way of Knowing, I realized that all 3 books will have the word other in the title. So I'm going to just read a very brief, the prologue and a couple of pages from Otherwise, which first introduce you to Margaret, and a little short passage which takes her back into a memory of her actual past. And then I will read from the new book. I love to do readings. It's my favorite part of being a writer. When I did my launch for this book, a woman in the audience, in fact, she's listening. A woman in the audience raised her hand and said how much she loved being read to. And as she said that, all the nodding of heads through the audience told me, yes, we're talking about something that fills a kind of quiet need, I think, in all of us, whether we're children or adults, and maybe especially adults, to hear a story read to us. And I get the pleasure every now and again to be the voice reading to you. So here's a little introduction. This is the prologue from Otherwise. Humming, she bends over the rounded clumps of herbs in the back garden. She gathers lavender and rosemary and mint, releasing fragrance into the morning air with each snip. Suddenly she raises her head, letting the last sprig of mint slip from her fingers. She straightens, listening. Nearby in the grass, 2 golden heaps rise up onto all 4s and stand erect, pointing off toward the trees along the horizon. Sheets dance and snap on the clothesline in the rising wind. The trio of crows lifts off into raucous flight, leaving fine branches of the giant oak shivering. And beneath it all, the snap, the caw, the shiver, a soft rumbling. Out of the woods and down the far hill it travels, spreading across the fields, coursing beneath the stream, and moving ever upward until the ground on which she stands trembles. A portrait of stillness, she remains, blue eyes searching. Strands of chestnut hair streaked with silver escape the clip at the base of her neck and whip around her face. The wind drops to a whisper as the buzzing beneath her feet softens into the familiar subtle tug of the earth. She nods, sighs, and bends back to her work. Sophia and Grace settle into the grass once more, their golden coats shining in the morning sun. Chapter 1. Emily settles on the porch swing and closes her eyes. Bits of conversation float in and out as she half rests, half listens. This reunion with her mother's people in Maine, this respite from her disintegrating life in Boston, has been sweet. The only sour note, her mother's absence. Saw Margaret in town today, Uncle Otis says. Told me to get that right rear tire fixed before I end up in the creek. You gonna fix it? Uncle Mert asks. Damn right. Long silence. There's a right puzzler for you, Mert says. Yep, never seen anyone like her. Emily leans in. I was at least 3 jigsaws going, Mert continues. Once when I was out there upgrading her electrical service, she finished one of the big ones only to find a piece missing. I would have exploded, been me, but not her. Just said, well, what do you know? I've been looking for the one with the yellow tip and it was among the missing all along. And she just moved on to the card table in the corner where she had a big round one going. Otis chuckles. When she saw me gawping, she says, here I have to find the piece with the umpteenth gradation of gray. Some people say she's a couple of pieces shy of a jigsaw puzzle herself. Others say worse. Jacob Pill swears she's got the evil eye, typical Jacob. Everything he doesn't understand must be about the devil. She just sees things differently from the rest of us. Not only sees things differently, sees different things than the rest of us, Mert laughs. Long pause. Emily looks over as Mert relights his pipe and watches the puffs of smoke lift off and dissolve. Sometimes she works from the inside out. Darndest thing. Most people start by finding all the edge pieces and framing it so as they can work inward. Not Margaret. And I'd go buggy jumping from puzzle to puzzle like she does. Yeah, one easy one at a time is more than enough for me. 500 tops, 500 pieces. Emily slides to the other end of the swing, closer to the uncles. I visited a puzzle shop in Vassalboro once. It had antique wooden ones, some quite valuable. I spent 2 hours in there. Where does this woman live? I left it. Margaret's kind of private, Emily, Otis says. Has her reasons. Had some troubles years ago. Learned to keep what they call a low profile since. You're better off staying put. Better grab some of Lily Mae's pie before it's gone. You get skinnier every time I see you. Don't people eat down there in Boston? Lives up off Oldfields Road, about 4 miles into the woods, Mert says as if Otis hasn't spoken. Interesting place, hers. Family land since way back, fields, woods. They go on for miles. She rents out a fertile chunk to a couple of local potters, real artists. She's an artist herself. Watercolors and squiggly little Japanese poems. Right up your alley, Miss Museum Assistant. I could take you up there before you leave. Maybe she'd invite us in for a look. Maybe not, says Otis. Emily's just a kid, Otis. Margaret surely wouldn't mind a curious kid, especially since she's one of ours. And she might offer something besides a look-see at her puzzles and poems to a hollow-eyed girl who's working too hard, not getting enough sleep. Thanks, Emily says, but I'm leaving early in the morning. Maybe next time I'm up. And I'm not a kid. I'm 29 now. Both uncles laugh. An hour later, Emily eases her car up the dirt road, bouncing through shallow potholes and skirting axle-deep craters. She can't get the image of puzzles and her uncle's words out of her head. Sees different things than the rest of us. She can't get that out of her mind. That's the beginning of the first chapter, and Emily meets Margaret for the first time. One other brief passage I'd like to share is a piece of Margaret remembering something from her childhood. Thunder rumbles overhead as fat raindrops splat against the windows. She's grateful for the sounds and smells of this summer storm, giving her something to focus on as she shakes loose the remnants of the childhood memory. She moves to the old Morris chair and sits, seeking the sturdiness of its solid frame and the comfort of its cushioned seat. Leaning back, staring out the window at the rain, she lets herself visit those dark days. 3 days and nights she lay trapped in that cellar, burned, bruised, and bloodied. 3 days and nights she'd floated between empty sleep and pain-soaked semi-consciousness, her prison alive with dark rustlings and scratchings. For 2 days and nights she waited to be found. On the last night and day, she begged for it to end. Only 9 years old and face to face with mortality, she wondered what death would feel like when it finally came. She tried to call out so it could find her, but the searing pain in her head sent her into vomiting spasms and she slipped into unconsciousness. The rain is heavy now, running down the window panes, blurring the world outside. Sophia and Grace have come to sit on either side of her chair, watchful, wary. "It's okay, girls," she says softly. "I'm all right. Just need to let this come." At that, the two lie down, settling like bookends, flanking her chair. "Just kids being kids," the police chief said. No need to ruin their young lives just because they took things too far. No need to get the law involved at all. She'd heard him talking to her mother and the doctor in the hall outside her bedroom. We make a big deal about it and they'll pick on her again. Keep on picking on her. You don't want that for her, do you? Best for her if we just leave them to their parents and you keep a closer eye on her. Her mother came into the room and they both heard the chief say to the doctor, "Kid's been picking on the strange ones since the beginning of time and will go on doing it till hell freezes. Best to teach her to keep her mouth shut and keep out of sight. Nothing we can do, it's just the way things are." When her mother sat down beside her, her fragile frame barely jostled the bed springs. She lay her hand on Margaret's forehead. "I'm so sorry, my sweet. I'm so sorry they hurt you." She kissed her daughter's cheek and quietly wept. 3 days, I was worried sick. Then suddenly she straightened, wiped her face with both hands and said firmly, "Best to put it behind us, Maggie. Best to forget about it. Best to forget all about it." And that had been that. 9 years old, bullied and battered and left locked in a root cellar for 3 days by a group of kids who were bigger and older than she was. And that was that. And now I would like to read from the new book in progress, This Other Way of Knowing. In this book, there will be new characters, of course, and some of the old characters. Everybody will probably come around again in the third book. One never knows. I don't know. This is a scene in which Margaret has found her grandmother's journal, which had been tucked away by her mother. "I kept it from you. I thought it for the best. Forgive me." The words float back again. Margaret pulls over a chair and sits, the book she's discovered still pressed to her heart. Carefully, she works out the knot and unties the cloth binding, and as she lays the book open on the table, a sheaf of loose pages slides out. Charcoaled sketches and complex drawings, soft watercolors in various stages of completion, poems with slashes and corrections written in erratic strokes. Margaret spreads them out, taking them in as a whole while zeroing in and out on particular pages, certain sections of colors, symbols, characters. Her eyes stop, focused on 3 words, faintly scratched beneath a nebulous egg. She looks more closely at the egg and the watery images within. 2 babies float, umbilicals entwined. Maggie and Maddie, written beneath. "She knew us before we came." Maddie's voice echoes in the silence of the room, dancing with the dust motes and the thinning shafts of sunlight. Margaret moves the drawings aside and flips through the inside pages of the book. It's an artist's journal, a blending of imagery and written passages, all in her grandmother's hand. Some entries are dated, some are not. There are gaps, long periods of silence followed by a flow of daily entries. Later at the kitchen table, a steaming cup of tea beside her, Margaret again opens her grandmother's journal. The loose pages crackle as she sets them aside and riffles back through the book to the first page. On the inside cover, the name Lucinda Hamilton Meader is written in a delicate, upright script, no slant. Almost childlike, it nevertheless radiates quiet strength. The first page begins with a short prayer. "May I be of service today and all days. May I use my gifts in service of the whole community. May I never forget that my gifts come through me and are not of me. may the blessings be. Below it is a sketch of a single pine tree by a pond, a lone heron standing on the far side. Margaret turns the page. I've always had the dreams. Sometimes they filter in as I sleep and burble up when I wake. Other times, the one called the shepherdess ushers them in. When I was very young, she brought the same one, night after night. She swept into my room, steeped in urgency, draped in a mourning cloak. Chest heaving, she bent low and spread a scene out before me with a wave of her shepherd's crook. I felt a deep rumbling, and the frightening scene appeared. A terrible flood, not of water, but moving just as fast. A thick, viscous something dark. Screaming people running, some not fast enough. An overpowering smell stung my nostrils. Burnt sugar. Beyond burnt. Sickening. Then 2 nights of silence. No dreams at all. Until it happened. Margaret knows what her grandmother is describing before she turns the page. She'd read about the incident. She takes a breath and opens to the drawing, sketched across 2 facing pages. A huge tank at the top of a hill, blowing its top and bursting its sides. Thick molasses, erupting into the air and flowing lava-like down toward the houses below. People running for their lives. One man, his face a mask of agony, lunging forward as the flow overtakes him. Nearby, buildings collapsing as a tar-like tidal wave knocks them from their foundations. Margaret flinches as she scans her grandmother's rendering of the tragedy that she had witnessed as a child, a week before it happened. Over 2 million gallons of molasses had burst from a holding tank on a hill above Commercial Street in the north end of Boston in January 1919. It had killed and maimed people, swept away horses and carriages, and destroyed buildings in its path. Just recently, her friend Kenneth had brought it up in a conversation about the loosening of government regulations around building standards and environmental protections. He'd said we too often wait for disasters to occur before establishing common sense regulations. He'd explained that the Great Molasses Flood and the more famous Coconut Grove Fire had led to standards and codes unknown before and taken for granted today. Despite the seriousness of the subject, Margaret smiles at the memory of the inner light animating Kenneth's handsome face during his impassioned speech and his good-natured laughter when he caught himself mid-rant and said, "Nothing like preaching to the choir." But the details of the event, though horrific, hadn't affected her so deeply as they did in this moment, looking down at Lucinda's dreamscape. A little girl, dreaming this event again and again. A dream so vivid she could reproduce it in great detail years later as an adult. How terrifying for her. Was she able to turn to someone, allowed to talk about it? I didn't know it was molasses. How could I? That would have seemed too far-fetched, and I didn't know when or where it would happen. I just knew it would and that I couldn't stop it. Most all my dreams were of real events, sometimes from the past, but mostly in the future. And I had them when awake in full daylight, too. I would meet someone and see a scene from their life right then and there. Or I'd know the secret they were carrying. Or I would know something was going to happen to them, usually something bad. When I was really little, I blurted out what I saw, but I quickly learned to keep it to myself. My mother and father set me down and told me it was best to tell them about my dreams and day visions when we were alone. Later, when I was a bit older, they told me that Dad and his sister Jenny Lynn both had the dreams too. They said it ran in the family, and when I asked them what they meant by it, they said, the sight. Jenny Lynn died when I was a baby, so I couldn't talk to her about it, but Dad talked with me when he was around. He taught me to breathe my way through the aftermath of the dreams and to detach myself when recounting them. And the shepherdess began to help when she brought the dreams, until I learned to step outside the dream and watch without emotion as it unfolded. And my mother did her best to listen and soothe me when I was full of questions or confusions, even though she didn't have the sight. Margaret looks up, these words comforting her. How wonderful it must have been for Lucinda to be able to talk about it and with someone who understood, someone who didn't hush her and pretend her experiences away, someone who could offer advice. A moment of quiet envy surprises her, and she shakes it off with a shudder. I'm glad they were there for you. I'm glad you had someone to turn to. I know how much that must have meant. As she sits with this, she tries to conjure an image of Lucinda, but the air around her is empty. She wonders why handling the journal and seeing her grandmother's handwriting hasn't brought even a wisp or a glimpse of Lucinda, the Lucinda she longs to see. She settles back in her chair, startled when her phone rings in her bag on the harvest table by the door, reminding her that she's ignored it twice already. She retrieves the bag and answers. Another excerpt from another part. We again see a little bit of Otis, who was one of the men speaking in the first part of the first book. There's a new wackadoodle in town, Otis says, looking over the top of his newspaper at Emily and Janet. Oh? They respond in unison. Trying to horn in on the investigation into that poor girl's death up by Wandering Rock. He snaps the paper back up in front of his face. And Janet smirks at her daughter as she speaks. Is that all you're going to tell us? Otis lays the paper flat on the table and leans forward on his elbows. This reporter for the Gazette says he has it on first hand from, he looks down and traces his finger over a section of the paper searching. Here it is. Miss Marcella Catriona McRae, certified psychic medium, that the dead woman was attacked and killed with an axe by a creature, part animal, part human, who has been sighted over the years in the nearby woods. No. Yep. Then the son of a gun goes on to take a pot shot at Margaret. Margaret, for God's sake. What do you mean a pot shot? He says, again, Otis bends to search the article. Here, he says, seems there's a new psychic in town stealing Margaret Meader's thunder right in her own backyard. That ignorant little snot. He goes on to talk about Margaret and her special ways, sensationalizing her work with the police and when she found that missing teen, Alyssa Cates, a while back. Other stuff too, going way back. Some bits of truth amid fantastical lies, putting Margaret out there on display and making it sound like she and this psychic medium woman are cut from the same cloth and are in competition. The Gazette used to print honest to goodness news. Now it's turning into a rag and the likes of that guy on board. I'm going to write a letter to the editor. And how exactly does one become certified as a medium? And, oh God, Emily looks from her mother to her great uncle. Odd James, the old hermit. This will send people out searching for him. There's no telling what they'll do if they find him. We have to do something. I'm going over to Margaret. She'll know what to do. But Otis cuts her off. This reporter's made Margaret a target by bringing her into the story. Damn him and that Marcella, what's her name? He's out of his chair, dishes clattering as he helps her clear the rest of the breakfast things. I'm going into town, see what's brewing there. Emily pulls into Margaret's yard and parks behind John Longfeather's pickup and Sam Kingston's camper. She nods in satisfaction at finding both men there. She finds the three of them out back of the house. Margaret, have you read the paper about? Yes. We've been out posting no trespassing signs around the property lines, but I'm afraid that won't stop the determined. Where did that McRae woman come from anyway? Have you heard of her before? Will the investigators take her seriously? Emily's red curls bounce as she looks from one to the other. Margaret sighs. It's not the investigators I'm worried about. It's the crazies who are likely to run half-cocked, chasing down another wild tale about poor James, chasing him down. He doesn't deserve this. And so, no, I've never heard of her. And that hideous reporter, that's not journalism, that's the stuff of tablets. Who the hell is he anyway? The little shit. Sam Kingston spits the word. Don't know him, but I intend to find out more about him. Stirring up trouble for the old guy and for Margaret. Too irresponsible. Plus poor excuse for a reporter. Downright despicable. The damage is done, John says. Old James served his country, asked only to be left alone when he came home. They're interrupted by the sound of tires crunching up the dirt drive and the clunk of a car door out front. All heads turn as a tall young man rounds the corner of the house, a camera bag swinging from his left shoulder and a smartphone clenched in his right hand. His pale face is pocked, and the thick lenses of his rimless glasses accentuate large brown eyes. He strides across the yard, soggy from snowmelt, his focus on Margaret as if the others don't exist. Miss Meader, Miss Margaret Meader? Before she can respond, Sam Kingston takes 3 steps toward him, blocking his path. And who might you be? He barks. Not a certain reporter, Sam punctuates the word, from the Gazette, here to stir up more trouble, I hope. As she watches, Margaret flashes back to her first encounter with Sam, remembering him rounding the same corner of the house, her drying her hair in the sun, him coming around toward her caught off guard, the dogs growling beside her, fear prickling before she could sort him out. And now, months later, this good, trusted friend is ready to defend her. The younger man stops, towering over Sam, scowling. I'm here to talk to Miss Meader, the psychic. Get her take on the murder up at the Wandering Rock. Give you a chance to... It's okay, Sam. She moves up beside him. I'm Margaret Meader, and you are? Visibly flustered by this simple question, the man pats his many pockets and finally digs out a stained and crumbled business card, hands it to her. Name's Ross Templar, reporter for the Gazette. I'm just trying to get a statement, just doing my job. His large eyes land everywhere but on Margaret's as he speaks. And you want a statement from me because? Because you work with the lead investigator on this case. It's well known you're his resident psychic. I have nothing to say. And if I were you, I'd stick to printing facts and information released to you by those in charge of the investigation. The who, what, when, where, and how of it all. Provable, reliable facts, not suppositions. I would say that's doing your job, wouldn't you? I go where I'm led by the information I'm given, Ms. Meader, and the information Marcella Macrae gave me led me to you. Or are you afraid of a little psychic rivalry, perhaps? With this, he smirks, challenging her with raised brows and a haughty stance. If not, why not tell me your version? What did you see? What do you see when you look into the case? At this, he leans down, his face inches from hers. The sun, glinting off thick lenses, has his eyes shimmering, multiplying and retracting in grotesque dance. A disturbing image surfaces, forcing Margaret to step back and look away. 2 sets of eyes stare out of the dead woman's body with bursts of spidery red lines, petechia, reminding her of a drawing from her grandmother's journal. Without a word, she rushes to the house, leaving the back door standing open behind her. John, Sam, and Emily close in around Templar. You call yourself a journalist? Sam steps forward again. You're a muckraker, a tabloid hack. Where's your pride, young man? Sensationalism serves no useful purpose. Stirring up rumor and endangering innocence? You should be ashamed. And if anyone ends up hurt, it's on you. I don't know who you are, old man, so back off. Templar starts to turn away. Better watch yourself, son. John Longfeather's John Longfeather's arresting voice has him turning back. Oh, what? You threatening me, Tonto? Emily gasps. Sam opens and closes his mouth, shocked beyond speech. Just cautioning you. John's face offers no clue to what's going on inside, and his voice is so quiet. Templar is forced to lean in to hear his next words. I'm sure you don't want to harm anyone, any innocent folk, because you didn't do your due diligence, because you didn't think before you put incendiary remarks from a dubious source into print. Templar's body stiffens as he stands glaring at John. Then without a word, he turns and walks away. Like Sam said, it's on you if anyone gets hurt. Not a good thing to have on your heart. John's voice follows him out of sight. I just wanted to introduce to those readers who are waiting for the second book to the fact that there are some new characters and incidents. One very brief part. Detective Jay Horner's message asks her to call him. A twinge of guilt niggles. She should have given him the heads up about Molly's call. He answers on the second ring. Hi, Jay. If this is about Molly Makepeace, I owe you an apology. She called me yesterday and Molly Makepeace called you? Molly Makepeace is dead, Margaret. His words land like a punch. Dead? Are you sure? I'm standing in a field looking at her body right now. It's definitely her. I recognize her from before when we dealt with her, and her ID is in her purse. But she can't finish her thought because her mind is grappling with the fact that she sees and feels nothing. No images, no words or phrases, no sense of connection to the woman she spoke to only hours ago. She feels the same odd emptiness she'd experienced last time Molly Makepeace came into her life. The same disconnect, the same sense of unease. Where? She's lying in the snow out by Wandering Rock. Margaret lowers into a nearby chair. I was just out there yesterday. I hate to ask you, but can you come out? Of course, I'll be right there. All the way to the site, Margaret replays her phone conversation with Molly. She'd had no premonition about the woman's death, felt nothing, missed any warnings there might have been. As she gets out of the car, heads toward the ribbon of police tape fluttering in the wind, she can see Jay and a woman standing back as several people in protective suits lean over the body. She shivers. She waits, watching and listening. After a while, she closes her eyes, hoping to adopt a more receptive stance. She quiets her breathing, relaxes her shoulders, notes the tension she's holding there. Silence, but for the murmur of voices and the distant crunch of boots on snow, invites her to deepen her inner gaze. A subtle wetness touches her cheek and she opens her eyes. An easy snowfall has resumed. Fat flakes floating down and dancing playfully around the frozen body on the ground. Wandering Rock, the immense glacial erratic, rises into the whiteness. Tracks! A shout dispels the quiet. A barked order sends several people in the direction of the call, all carefully traveling the periphery and then off into the woods. A sudden image comes. A mound of ragged pelts, a dirt-streaked bearded face, thick curls slick with grease framing a pair of pain-soaked eyes as blue as her own. The staccato rapping of a frightened heart, a feral grunt. Stop! She's surprised a moment later to realize the word has come from her. Jay runs to her side as she again calls out, stop them, please, stop them. What's wrong? What is it? Jay shouts. This is not about him, Jay. Please make them leave him alone. It's nothing to do with him. A piercing scream stops her. Primal, more animal than human. It rends the air, leaving behind a vibratory signature shivering through her bones. Everyone stops, momentarily frozen in place, mouths open, hands to hearts. Inside the pause, the rift in the time that follows, Margaret reaches out to him, hoping to calm the hammering of his heart, quiet the thrumming of his blood. Even as she feels the futility, she tries desperately to reach those grabbing him, trying to subdue him, begging them to let his untamed spirit be. They're manhandling him, she shouts to Jay. She points toward the body. This is not about James. He's not connected. Make them stop. Jay walks over to a uniformed trooper she doesn't recognize. We found a suspect in the woods yards from a dead body, and you want us to let him go? Seriously? Jay places a hand on the man's shoulder as he leans in and speaks quietly. The man mulls this over, then nods, takes out his phone. A few minutes later, he says something to Jay and heads off to the woods. He got away, Jay assures her. Seems his tracks disappear a few yards into the woods. No sign of him at all. They'll continue searching, but I don't think they'll likely find him. Good. Though I can't imagine why he came so close. James steers clear of people. You know him? James who? James Harshett. I only know of him. They call him Odd James. He's a Vietnam vet who lives in the woods, a hermit who prefers the natural world to that of men. Local lore thrives on Odd James stories and sightings. Margaret stops, losing herself in a memory. She's standing in the woods, in the farthest corner of her property, and hears an unusual bird call. Puzzling over its identity, she looks up to see something large leap from the middle branches of an old pine to the thick limb of a young oak. She wills herself to be still. She remains unmoving as what appears to be a huge animal turns toward her. She meets his gaze and acknowledges with a brief sizzle of connection, with the slightest upward turning of her lips and a gentle nod. Crouching on the limb, his eyes soften as his lean-muscled shoulders visibly relax. And then he's gone, disappearing into the leafy canopy of the midsummer forest without warning. Did she imagine the shadow of a nod in return to her own? She wonders still as she returns her attention to the snowy field of cold and death and Jay's words. And thus, I share with you portions of This Other Way of Knowing, the second in the series about Margaret Meader. And I'm happy to answer any questions, or Chris, you look like you might have something to say.
I was just going to say that it was wonderful reading. I personally have gotten about halfway through the first book otherwise, and I'm really looking forward to finishing it and getting the second one. Your prose is very poetic and very musical, and then especially the way you read it, it just adds more to it. And we have a few comments that you're a wonderful speaker, you have a wonderful speaking voice, wonderful reading. I do have one comment. I finally got the Facebook Live up and running, so we're there. And I do have a comment from a Deborah Williams, who says she's so excited to be here to see the multifaceted and tremendously talented Mrs. Bagley, as I knew her, my former drama teacher at Dover High.
Oh,
so welcome, Deborah. I'm glad you joined us. For those who did join a little late, don't forget, you can use the chat feature to ask the questions, and I'll bring you up if you'd like to present the question or comment to Mary Lou in person, or I can do that for you. So back to your voice and the speaking and the reading. We do have a question from Joanne. Have you ever thought of doing your book or is it an audiobook?
I would love to do that, and no, it isn't as yet. I have to work out the details. I have a short story audiobook that I did years ago, and I would love to go back into a studio and fix some things, you know, when you look back. It's short stories actually called Out of the Dark. I could get some copies to you, Chris.
Sure.
There are 4 stories in it. So I do love doing that. It's just a matter of, you know, working out. My publisher had talked to me about that, and then coronavirus came along and he's been busy and all. So
Right.
short answer, I would love to and hope to. And I have some people that tell me, you know, they really don't read. They like to listen. So
Yeah. Well, I find it very, I didn't think I'd be an audiobook person, but it does help. Being around the store when nobody's in there, I can get books for the store. My former life, I had a long drive to Manchester and back, so I got introduced to audiobooks, and it was great for the ride, so I can see the appeal in them. Would you want to read your own or narrate your own, or would you want somebody else to do it? And is there a particular TV star, movie star that you'd want to read?
oh, I would like to do it, but I would love to have some name people or people who are, you know, used to doing the audiobooks for the various voices and all to do that. Margaret, oh, there's so many actresses that I love. Oh, 3 Billboards. Oh gosh, I can't think of her name. I could see her. McDormand.
Oh, I love her.
Yes, I can't think of her. Frances.
Frances
McDormand.
McDormand.
She would be good.
She's fabulous. Hi, Mary Lou.
Hello.
Love to you.
Love
It's
to you too.
Jewel.
We have a question from Melanie Turner. Melanie, if you'd like to bring up your mic, turn on your mic and your video and ask Mary Lou your question. Welcome, Melanie.
Hi, Mom. How are you? That's my mom, who's amazing, as you can tell. So I do have a question. Was which one of the books was more fun to write and why?
Ooh, that is a good question. It's always the one I think that I'm working on at the moment that seems to be the most fun. The first otherwise took a long time because it kept going on the shelf and all that. Once I got into the rhythm of it just a few years ago, it was fun. I do love walking around with these characters in my head. You know, when I'm out walking or doing anything, they'll be there. That's fun. So since they're the same characters, they're equally fun.
Well, good. I can't wait for the next one, as you know. Love you.
Love you too. Thanks for coming.
Thank you, Melanie. So what is your writing process? That's one thing I'd like to ask all the authors that we've had participate, because you know, everybody has their own different style. Did you, well, in relation to your third book, when you were reading the second one, you said, you know, you're thinking of the third one, you don't know where it's going to take you or what's going to happen. So where some people start with the end. I had some person start with the ending and then they work up to that point to create their novel. Some do it in outline. They have everything done, or they have different chapters and bring it together. You just sort of free flow and go, or what's your process?
I envy people who can outline and know where they're going in one way, but I do love the process, which can be slow and slogging at times, of being surprised. So I am what one would call a pantser, which is seat of the pants rather than a plotter. And I sit down and I go and suddenly someone will appear that I didn't expect, a new character, or someone will say something, or I'll come to these places where a scene more or less ends and it's a moment of, wonder what's going to happen next. And something happens. Sometimes you have to write through some sort of garbage to get to what's going to happen. But yeah, I'm definitely not a plotter or an outliner. And I wish at times that I could be. I'm struggling a little bit, in fact, with the ending of the second book, and I wish it would come clearer.
So where you do sort of fly off the seat of your pants, do you carry around a notebook with you? Do you, are you out during the day or at let's say you're at dinner with family or friends and all of a sudden a thought comes up. Do you say, oh, hold that, I gotta write this down. And do you, pull out your phone or pull out a piece of paper or something or a napkin?
I often do that, jot things down. Yeah, everything, life is material. And so again, a conversation with somebody else may have something come up for me. So yeah, I do try to jot. Oh, Jewel. I do try to jot things down. I do have notebooks everywhere often. I have a friend that calls hers a noticing book, where you just have this little tiny one and you can just jot phrases or an image or something. And sometimes I do that and sometimes I don't. But there's always a way to get it down or make it stick in my head. Sometimes I'll make a little song in my head that reminds me of that point.
Do you have a certain ritual or certain process? A lot that I've interviewed seem to like the early morning when it's all quiet and to do their writing. And then of course throughout the day, if they come up with something that spurs their interest. Do you have a particular time that you like to write, a particular place you like to write?
I am not a morning person, but I do write in my morning. I get up, I have breakfast, and then I write. I used to write well into the night. I am more of a night person, and as an actress, of course, the schedule is always you're working at night and then you're wide awake at the end, So nighttime, to me, people talk about early morning before people wake up. Well, at nighttime, most everyone's gone to bed in the really late hours, and nobody's going to be calling you, and but lately it's been, like I say, I get up maybe 9, that kind of morning, and have the breakfast and then get to it. And I do mostly write at my space where I am right now, the room where it happened, surrounded by imagery that works for me either for the story or just is pleasant. I have a little note that says, write your damn book, write your way through. I have a placard by my desk that was given to me years ago by Don Murray, who is a professor at UNH, journalist. And this is never a day without a line. And I know there are a lot of writers, especially who went to UNH, who have this phrase. So again, my desk area is filled with positive imagery. I have a picture that I love of some sort of hooded figures around a fire leaning in, and I call it the storytellers. And I found a really lovely, funky frame one time years ago, put it in that, and I cut it out of a magazine. It's, so I really can't share it because it's not my image. When I sit down, I ring the ting sha, which is this the ting sha. To me, that is just signaling to myself, this is writing time. And then I light a candle and I get to work. And sometimes I'll forget the candle part and I'll be writing, oh, the candle's not lit. It's just settling, again, my own personal way. Some people would think that's, crazy, whatever, but I don't care because it works for me. And I do need quiet. I remember Jennifer Vaughn, who did the talk with you. She loves the noisy busyness of a newsroom because that's her background. So it's seat of the pants to the seat of the chair, do my little ritual and get to work.
Sally Hirschberg, who's watching, says, it's Mary Lou, the actress whom I love to listen to. I hope you do get a chance to do the audiobook. How has one influenced the other? The acting influenced your writing, or your writing influenced your acting? Well, let's start with, so you've done local acting here in southern Maine, and you've done Steel Magnolias, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, you've been in Nonsense. You were supposed to be Hannah Ferguson in the Spitfire Grill last month or a couple months ago there at the Hackamattack Theater. Of course, that didn't happen. Let's start with, how did you get into acting?
I got into acting late. What many people think is late. I was in my late 30s, early 40s before I stepped on a stage. I mean, I had been in high school productions, and I actually taught theater arts, as Deborah Williams said, at Dover High, but it was the hot potato of the English department, and they said, I was new, you take it. And I sort of kept ahead of the kids, and many of them knew that, and I learned a lot from them. But I went to Portsmouth when the Portsmouth Academy of the Performing Arts came to Portsmouth to sign my daughter up, who was about 11 at the time, I think, for a workshop for kids, and saw that there was an adult actors lab. And I thought of it as personal growth, you know. I'd always been the one, as a teacher at Dover High, if someone was retiring or something, they would ask me to do a little poem and do a little performance or something. So that was always there. So I started this actors lab, and I'm working with people who were doing commercials, doing films, doing a lot of stage work. And I eased my way into it and built up a resume and take every workshop I can get my hands on. And that's how it happened.
When were you at Dover High?
In the 80s, for a few years. I taught for about 8 years.
Okay. I graduated in 89. So I was there for...
Just missed me.
Oh, well, you might have known my father then, Harold Upton. He was the drafting teacher.
Yeah.
Drafting. So when did you start writing?
I've been writing since I was a kid. My older sister Anne was always telling us stories, and she had a loose leaf binder that had stories in it. And also with the acting, my mother always had a costume box. Yeah, so I was always writing. I always said if I were stranded on a desert island and I could only have, you know, one thing, it would be something to write with and something to write on. But I was mainly writing short stories, poetry, and fairly recently flash fiction, which I do love. And otherwise also came out of a need to explore the novel form. Margaret's story felt like it needed to expand and breathe. And so I did the novel. But yeah, I've always, and my degree, of course, is in English education. And I took a lot of the writing process courses at UNH and other places.
So then how did your writing then influence your acting? Or did it?
It's hard to separate. I know the dialogue in acting helps me with my writing dialogue. Because I feel like I could not write a play, so maybe I should try that sometime. Because it is totally dependent upon really snappy, deep, well done dialogue. But it's hard to it's hard to separate the parts of myself.
Have you ever written any poetry?
Yes. I've taken many workshops with Kimberly Cloutier Green, who's in Kittery, and others. I recently took one with Brian Evans Jones in South Berwick. And I've done some ekphrasis experiences through Kittery Art Association, where you take a painting and you write from that painting. It could be you're writing from the perspective of a person in the painting or a landscape, or that's a lot of fun. In fact, one of my short stories was accepted in a book in Maine. 10 Maine authors were chosen by submitting our stories based upon 10 paintings. No, it was more than 10. A bunch of paintings by an artist. And we were asked to pick one of those paintings and write a story from it. And they boiled it down to 10 of us. And it's in a book called Summer Stories. And that was a great experience. That's not poetry, but that's the ekphrasis,
right.
ekphrasis thing.
So you're also you're also an artist, a multi-discipline artist. Your work, I'm just kind of reading your biography on your website here. Sometimes you're working about color, it's always about texture. What types of mediums do you use? What do you like to paint, print, create? What do you like to create?
Mostly fabric, making fiber arts, quilts, designing them. It's more free form. I took 4-H as a kid and learned to sew. And I always loved the feel and even the smell of fabric. So I more or less paint pictures with fiber, with cloth fabric. But I do some painting and just always exploring. A dear friend of mine who passed this past December, she used to travel around the country and teach teachers of other areas besides art how to incorporate art materials into their classes. And I took many workshops with Sally where we would play with materials I'd never played with before. I highly recommend that.
So your book, otherwise, it has a sort of a fantasy, mystical, spiritual aspect to it. Are those the type of books that you like to read? What are your favorite? What's your favorite genre? And what are you reading now?
I like a mix. And the reason one of the reasons I wanted to really play with Margaret is I wanted her to be real, down to earth, so that it might seem, again, mystical, fantasy even, and all of that, but I wanted her to be a real person with this particular extraordinary ability. I love Louise Penny, her Armand Gamache series. I love Sumunk Kidd. In fact, she has a spiritual element in her nonfiction that I've gained a lot from. So I like mysteries, I like literary fiction, science fiction to a point. I love Tolkien. I love the Hobbit. As an English teacher, I think I read that with sophomore classes. We had such fun. And I would read in class, being who I am, and then they'd go off and wanting to continue reading it. And it was just a wonderful way for kids in, to literature. Yeah, I'm a mix.
Anything in particular you're reading now?
Well, I'm waiting. My husband's finishing Louise Penny's latest. I also have some nonfiction that I'm reading, White Fragility being one of them. What else have I got there? I've got a pile of them. Michelle Obama's Becoming, which I didn't have a chance to read earlier. I'm getting to Sumunk Kidd's The Invention of Wings, which has been on my shelf for a long time and I haven't had a chance to read it. I think that's all that's on the list right now.
Has any particular writer, author influenced your writing or helped influence your writing?
Again, Sumunk Kidd. There's a book, and I can't think of her name. In fact, the author died and her daughter or niece finished the book. And that is the Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society. And what I loved about that book was I did not want to leave those characters and close that book. And this is what I wanted to be able to create. I mean, I've read other books like that, but that one stands out. It was like, I don't want to leave these people. So please let me write some people that people will not want to leave. Yeah, so that really, I don't know if that's the best book ever written, but there was something about that community and that experience.
Your book, otherwise, was published by a publishing company, local publishing company, Piscataqua Press.
Mm-hmm.
What was the route when you first finished the book and you were ready to publish? What was your thought? Self-publishing, or you wanted to go traditional? Do you have an agent? How did you go about getting an agent, if that's the case? How did you come up with the cover art? All those type of things that are involved now now that you have your finished work. Actually, let me start with this. You finished your work. Do you use beta readers?
No, and I'm exploring that.
Okay. All right. So now to the next part. What was the next step then? After you've done, where did you go?
I put my book into the hands of an editor on my own. I knew that if I got a publisher, they would, work on the editor part of it and all that stuff. But I know a woman that's an amazing editor, and several of my friends had used her. Plus, I didn't know her as well as I would like to, and now I do. And I know her mother, Elizabeth Barrett, is this phenomenal editor. And I knew that if I handed my book to her, that she would be honest, she would be direct, she would tell me exactly what she thought. She wasn't gonna pump sunshine up my skirt, that kind of thing, and when I did hand it off to her, I held my breath till it came back like, oh my God, she's gonna say, this isn't a book, And so I worked with her in a collaborative way, and I cannot say enough about the need for people to have an editor. However that comes to you, whether you hire one yourself. I wanted to hand it to a publisher already the best book I could come up with. If they wanted to give it to other eyes to work with, fine. But so the editor, first thing. I know people are putting their books up on a certain, not to be named, big book distributor online. And that's wonderful, because it's a wonderful avenue these days to be able to self-publish. But don't skip the having an editor part of that process. It would be one of the biggest things that I would say to people. She made all the difference. The book was also 156,000 words when I handed it to her, and it was 119,000 when it was published because of the work I did with her.
Speaking of number of words, I saw a thing on Facebook, a post, I don't remember from who, but they were advertising the NaNoWriMo. That's coming up pretty soon. You've partaken in that, haven't you?
I partook in the Flash one.
That's what it was. Okay.
It was really wonderful. It was 30 days and you come up with 30 Flash fiction pieces. So now you have at least nuggets that you can work into something else, or many of them, it turned out, stood on their own. And I've been meaning to do the NaNoWriMo, which is write a novel in a month. But it's always been that I was in the process of already writing, say this one, when I would think of it, and I thought, no, that's just not going to work for me right now. But I do like, there was another thing they recently did where you just posted online your number of words that day. And boy, again, if there were days when you didn't get your seat to the seat, you'd be thinking, oops, I didn't do any words today. Not that I write every day, but never a day without a line is a good starting point.
Now there's the adage that everybody judge a book by its cover.
Oh, you did ask me.
Do you believe in that, and how important is the cover of a book, and how did you choose the design of your cover?
Well, when I first started working with Tom, the publisher at Piscataqua Press, he was offering me various things to consult on, and they just weren't capturing, what I had in mind. I take photos, and I have a photographic line of greeting cards with my photographs, and I have this one of our old barn just before we had it restored, and I just always loved that picture. And so Tom took the picture, and it's there's a window. There was actually some parts of plastic or something hanging in here, but it actually, in the photograph, it's reversed. Otherwise, the window is over here in the real photograph. And Tom, in working with it, said, it's text on the right. There's something about the placement of the text that makes a difference in people noticing and what have you. And, he put it in the window, and I just love that. And then we discussed together the particular fonts and all of that sort of thing. But, I just love this book, and people said to me, you know what? Gray, black, brown, not the best choice, but wow. And I I have one friend that said, boy, my husband was walking by the coffee table and said, ooh, what's this book? It looks interesting. So there's something about the old shakes of an old building. And it's resonant of a number of things in the book, actually.
This is kind of one of the examples of less is more.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's not a lot. You got the shakes, you got the roof, the corner of the window, but and the title, but there's nothing else. So it's kind of intriguing. All right, what is this book?
Yeah.
Sometimes that in this case it works. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it needs more. But your new book, though, I saw a cover or a picture for the cover of that, where it's sort of the same thing but with puzzle pieces. Is that going to be the actual cover?
That was this book when I got my first copy to proof it. And I have wooden puzzles because Margaret is a puzzler. I use these a lot in like making up little marketing material. So I had wanted to put a puzzle piece on the initial book cover. So I think on the second book, we will work something out. And it may be more visual, a little more busy than this cover. I don't know. I don't know what it'll look like.
Well, Agnes says she has to leave the room now, but very much enjoyed listening to you read and having a chance to hear. And so thank you, Agnes, for joining us. Let's see. Sally says she's got to go too. Thank you very much for joining us. So your biography on your website says you're also a storyteller. What type of storytelling do you do?
Well, it's more about the writing stories, but I have been known to make up a character and sort of perform it. My sister used to hold retreats at a mansion over on the ocean, and this wonderful character came into my mind, and she comes down the staircase and she has lived this life of regret and she's a ghost. And the setting in this mansion and everything just made it perfect. So it became a piece that a lot of the women asked me to repeat several times. So it's that kind of, create a character and talk for. I did write a show years ago called Collage, Zany Bits and Some Serious Stuff. And it was started out as a woman show, but I had songs in it. So I had my friend accompany me. And my sister Ann actually came and did a belly dance in it. So yeah, it was putting together some stories and some borrowed materials. I used a piece that I paid for, not very much. I didn't get to pay her very much, but I paid her. Maisie Keith Daly had written this wonderful piece, and I included that. But a lot of it was just me making things up.
You mentioned paranormal, and of course, and otherwise, there's sort of a paranormal, mystical aspect to it. Do you believe in the paranormal?
I do. I've had some experiences myself, nothing like Margaret. I mean, Margaret is an extreme. That's why it does get into the mystical fantasy range, even though I want to keep her down to earth and real and normal. But I do. And just sort of Joseph Campbell type things too, where we have synchronicity come in and you go, woo, what happened there? I've had dreams before that have been premonitions. One very clear one, it's just a silly little thing. It didn't mean anything, but I dreamt of a Valentine. It was pink with red writing on it. And shortly thereafter, I was cast in a show that I didn't even know existed until I auditioned. And when the script came, it was a pink script with a red design on it of a woman's figure, and it was the Odd Couple female version. But I had seen this. I actually had a pre-9/11 dream too about calling 911, which was not something I'd ever done or thought about prior to that. My mother had occasional experiences of because she was also Scottish, and the Scots, quite strongly believe in the Celtic, second light. my grandmother came straight from the Isle of Skye. So yeah, and I love exploring it.
I enjoy reading a lot of Carl Jung. I
Mhm,
don't know if you're familiar with him and
mhm.
his psychology and philosophies and stuff. So yeah, I find that very interesting. Dreams, interpretation, and dreams, and collective unconsciousness, and all that.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
did you have to do any outside research for sort of the paranormal aspects of your books
I
or
did.
stories?
I did. I do research. I've read accounts from people who are psychic. Again, I have trouble with that word, and so does Margaret. It's just got a lot of baggage. But and I've read a lot of people who debunk um, fake psychics and what have you, and tell you what's going on. They're reading body language, whatever. We have a new psychic in this book, Marcella Catriona McCrae, and she's flamboyant and she's using some of the methods that these debunkers will tell you about. Yeah, so I do research it. The molasses situation that I wrote about, I've heard that before because my husband's father comes from the Boston area, and
Yeah.
he would talk about that. And so when it came out, and it just came out on the page that her grandmother had drawn this in her journal, and then I had to go and look it up to get some of the details to make sure that I basically had it right. Although I don't always worry about getting real facts right. It is fiction.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The places in Maine, I kind of jump around and you kind of don't know where you are exactly. And I've made up some towns and named some real places, but it's fiction.
Anybody in particular? You don't have to name names, but real life friends or family. Do you put that into your characters?
I do. Margaret is a composite of several people. John Longfeather is a combination, mainly one man that I know who's a friend. Someone did tell me that they felt I had made him a stereotype Native American, and my heart just kind of, and I thought, well, the guy that I know is really like him. I've added details, of course, but so I hope to God I'm not accused of appropriation or something. Yeah, so people make their way in, and especially sometimes it'll be just a name, and it might be a name of someone who bothered me. That, and I have a character coming up that's just mentioned in this book. I did a reading at a knitting shop that carries my book, and I had people put their names in a hat before we started, a knitted hat, of course. And I said, your name will be in the next book. So the name that came out is this wonderful name, Kasha Gula. And there is this character now that's in the book named Kasha Gula. So I guess I got off topic a little bit, but I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, yeah. Do you have any plans for, you've got the series coming, your book 2 is almost done, you have book 3 in mind. Do you have another project? So something, a different title, a different either series or a standalone book or something. Are you able to have a couple of those going at the same time? Or are you just straightly focused on this series and then move on from there?
I pretty much stick to one thing at a time. The same with my 3 personas, the artist, the actor, the author. If I'm in a show, I'm not doing a lot of writing because I'm focused on that. But as far as a book, there are some ideas swimming around and all, but mostly I'd like to get back to some of this flash fiction that had come out of that 30-day thing that I did. So that's in the back of my mind. And of course I have all of those in a file. Mm-hmm. But the novel itself is pretty much the only big thing I'm working on at a time.
Have you ever thought of taking those flash fictions and putting them into like a chapbook or making that into a?
Exactly, I'm thinking of that. Plus, I've had a couple of them published, so I wouldn't mind doing some more of that in the various online flash fiction, magazines and what have you. There's a wonderful writer up in Maine, Claire Guyton, and she did a year of writing what she called daily shorties. And that was her challenge for the year. And out of that has come some brilliant pieces of flash fiction that she's published. So I really admire that.
So back to the paranormal thing real quick, because I'm fascinated with the paranormal and stuff too, but have you ever watched any of those ghost hunter shows?
I have watched some of those, and I'm always hoping for more, like, show me, you know. The other thing about writing Margaret was I wanted to write a character about this because so often I'm disappointed in the fiction or the movies or what have you. So I wanted to have it come out the way I wanted to.
Have you ever taken notes while you're watching those debunking shows or ghost hunter shows,
Yeah.
paranormal shows, and say, oh, I could use this for this character, or I could use that for that character, or
Exactly.
this scene,
Yeah.
make that a scene in the book?
In fact, there's a scene in this, the phone call that Margaret got just before she finds out Molly Makepeace has died. That came out of years ago. I heard a psychic who worked with police tell a story about someone calling her up and saying what happens in my book. Basically, I've changed it to fit my book. And that always stayed with me, and I thought that's got to be in here. And it is. It's what set off. And I love mysteries, so I thought there's going to be a body in this one. So there is the body of the woman at Wandering Rock. I also love glacial erratics, so I thought I had to have one.
I've had this question come up a couple times with different people. One of our guests, her book is being made into, as soon as Hollywood gets going again, into a movie. Would you like to see Margaret on the big screen or even on the small screen?
I would love to. I would love that. I would love to get her in the hands of Reese Witherspoon, or, you know, one of those women, what's her name? Kevin Bacon's wife. Ugh. She's
Yeah.
she does she's got a production company and does a lot of women's writings. I would love that. Yeah. And I could do an appearance. I could do a cameo.
Yeah, I could picture, I guess Meryl Streep or the one who played Professor McGonagall in the Harry Potter movies as
Oh yes.
Margaret's grandmother.
Yes. Maggie.
Who could you see? Maggie Smith. Yeah.
Yeah.
Who could you see as Margaret?
Frances McDormand is one.
Yeah.
Although because Margaret has a prickly side as well as a gentle, you know, loving side. Meryl Streep would be great. Yeah, I have to think about that.
What about some of the male characters?
I'm gone blank. There's so many of them. And I know a lot of people love Otis. And of course, Otis is in the second book. And I have a friend who came to me after his wife died, and someone had come and said something to him. And he said, you know what? It really bothered me what they said. And I thought of this thing that Otis said. And it took me back into the book to find the actual passage he was talking about. And it gave him great comfort to have those words from Otis. And I hope Otis is one of the ones people don't want to leave. He's not featured a lot in this book, but he'll be back.
Have you ever been out and you're in the middle of a conversation or somebody says something and you end up quoting a quote from the book? For example, you know, you're out and then all of a sudden a situation happens or somebody says something and you say something from a movie or a TV show that you watched. Have you ever said, you know, and it's one of your characters?
See, because Margaret finds words that I don't have. I don't know where they came from. You know, she's my character, but yeah, I like some of the things she's come out with, to be honest.
So, in conversation.
That and being in conversation with other writers, that can be such a bitch because they'll say something and I'll think, oh, I can't use that. They're a writer. That's theirs.
How much do you work with other writers?
I do a lot of working in a writing community that I also would recommend that people do. I'm about to do a retreat from home with Jody Poloni, who is Maine Coast Writers, And she does these wonderful workshops and retreats. So I now have this community of women that I wouldn't have met, down in this area. Um, and then the Maine Writers and Publishers Alliance offers lots of workshops. They usually do what's called the Maine Crime Wave once a year. They couldn't do it this year in person. So whether or not you write crime or mystery work, you're with writers, and there are breakout workshops, and there's the keynote speaker, and there's the panels and what have you. That's how I met Bruce Coffin. I recommend his works. He's a former Portland, Maine police detective, and he's written a series with a Maine detective named John Byron, and his name is Coffin. I mean, the author's name is really Coffin, and I just love that. But he's great, and one of those generous writers who loves sharing with other people. So I've been doing a lot of Zoom listening to Meet the Author sessions, and yeah.
How has this pandemic has really put a damper on and changed a lot of the way businesses and theaters and performances and even writing. You talked about the workshop that you're doing or the retreat that you're doing, where normally you'd go off somewhere, spend some time, I'm kind of generalizing, in the woods with some other writers.
A B&B on the ocean is where it was going to be.
You can't beat that. But now it's all online. So how in other ways has this pandemic changed the way that you do your writing?
That is one of the gifts, actually, of the pandemic is Zoom. I have been able to attend workshops and classes that I wouldn't have been able to get to without the pandemic because of distance, because of timing, what have you. So yeah, again, all these Meet the Authors I've been doing, the retreats and workshops. I do yoga, 2 different classes. One of them I was doing here in Kittery, but now I can also do Peggy Cappy, who is a fabulous yoga instructor, and she lives over in Peterborough. And that's a bit of a trip, so I wouldn't be going every week. So I'm doing Peggy's class. So it's been, that's the upside. It's certainly not the same as being in person. But the SAG-AFTRA, I'm a member of SAG-AFTRA, the actors union. My mailbox is overflowing with things that they're offering because nobody's working. We're getting back toward it, but yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, speaking of Zoom, unfortunately, our time has come to an end. Unless there's something else that you'd like to mention, talk about. Does anybody else have any quick questions or comments for Mary Lou? If not, then go ahead and end this. I'll give a second for people to respond. Did you have any last minute words?
Just a quick thing from Louise Penny. She wrote this: my first drafts, as you know, are huge, soft, and smelly, and about 140,000 words. But by the time I edit, by the 4th draft or so, it's leaner and, one hopes, less stinky, down to about 120,000 words, or really whatever the theme demands. At that stage, I send it to Lisa and my editors to read. Such is the process. First draft is about experimenting, exploring, being bold. Subsequent drafts are about honing, clarifying, simplifying, deodorizing. I just thought that was great.
Peggy says, thank you, Mary Lou, for your kind mention.
Peggy.
Judy Edwards, nice to get to see you and get to know a little bit about what you've been up to. Peggy, thank you so much for this. Loved hearing you read. Couldn't imagine a better reading from any movie star. From Roberta Beavers, from Bobby, thanks for this wonderful hour and a half. You all are very welcome. And I just want to, again, otherwise is in store here. We have autographed copies. And if you don't know where we are, we're a Freethinker's Corner. We're at 652 Central Ave in Dover, right on the main strip, just north of downtown, the edge of downtown, right across from the Wigan Purdy Funeral Home. And we hope to see you all here at some point. Please support, if not us, please support your local bookstores. We are all having a hard time. We're getting through. We've had a couple close, one in Connecticut, one out west due to the pandemic and not being able to open due to restrictions and stuff. But online ordering, from them. Call if they're not open physically, call them to order. Go online to their websites. A lot of them have web stores that you can purchase through. We do as well. All our new books are online. Used books, you can call to see if we have it. They can also order books. A lot of them are hooked up, including us, with audiobook companies and ebook companies, so you don't have to go to that who shall not be named for your electronic reading pleasures. So that's my plea. You know, you folks support us, they don't. So, you know, that's how we're going to survive. And otherwise, and also, you know, we understand that certain outlets are a necessity for writers. But also without your support for us as well, we wouldn't be here. So we do appreciate you, coming to us with your books to have.
And I do also have a website, maryloubagley.com. Please visit me. And that place that shall not be named, if you are a member of them and buy from them, you can put a review of a favorite author on there. As long as you're a customer, you do not have to have bought the book from them. And reviews do help because it gets the word out about books. And then you go to your independent bookstore and you buy it.
And with our site in particular, you can leave a comment on our website as well. You just go to the purchase page for the book. So you search for Otherwise, you go to that, and where you can purchase it, there's also a comment box on the bottom. Leave a comment or a critique or whatever, and I'll definitely pass it on to Mary Lou or any of our other authors. So once again, thank you very much. Appreciate it, and I can't wait to have you here in person.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, everybody.
Okay. Have a good day, everybody.
Bye-bye.